Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Allah Ta'ala has blessed us to be in the last days of Ramadan. And maybe this is the last day of Ramadan, and may Allah Ta'ala allow us to have many more Ramadans. Ameen, ameen. So the 29th is Juz'. We memorize a lot of these surahs. And in the 29th Juz', you can find this from the beginning of Al-Mulk, of course, ayah 1 to verse 50 of Al-Mursalat. And that is pages 562 to 581 of the Mus'haf. All right, so for bringing all of this together, I wanted to reflect on the legacy of a prophet that gave his all to calling his people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because this prophet, Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, really embodies for us, dear brothers and dear sisters, that as believers, we're focused on the long view of history. As I said, the kuffar, the Zionists, the munafiqeen, the Americans, they have not written the end of the story. Allah Ta'ala has written the end of the story, and the end is for the righteous. And so you have a prophet who spent a millennium, almost, right? The Qur'an tells us 1,000 years except 50. So Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, who spent centuries talking to his people, asking them to turn to Allah Ta'ala, to stop oppressing the weak and the poor, to stop being arrogant, to stop worshiping idols. And time again, their response was derision. Their response was mockery. You know, these ancient peoples of the past that Allah Ta'ala describes in the Quran are really not that much different from today's arrogant kind of civilizations that we see, my dear brothers and dear sisters. If you look at Ad and you look at the people of Ad and the people of Thamud, and you look at Fir'aun and his associates, you look at the people of Nuh, they're they have a lot of traits that we see very much present in these oligarchs, these billionaires, these tyrants, these dictators. So, you know, from that in that perspective, human nature really has not changed a lot, has it? And so these Quranic stories become very important reminders in how to deal with this type of intransigence of kufr and not succumb to it. And so the story and the dua of Nuh is really telling. So I'm going to share with you ayat from chapter 71, and let's see the dua that Nuh made, because you can imagine Sayyidina Nuh making these supplications in an effort to really kind of make sense of this entire situation around him. And he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَقَالَ نُوحُ الرَّبِّ لَا تَذَرْ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ دَيَّارًا. Noah had prayed, my Lord, do not leave a single disbeliever on earth. Now, let me comment on this. I'd least anything be misconstrued. Prophets and messengers, by their very nature, are merciful and clement human beings. So, Sayyidina Nuh, I want you to understand this very important point here. What Sayyidina Nuh is actually calling for right now, what he's praying for, he's asking Allah Ta'ala to not allow the systems and structures of kufr to persist. That's what this is about. The systems, the structures, the infrastructure that allows, again, the world's wealthiest country to send $25 billion, not for homelessness, not for healthcare, not to alleviate student loans, not to rebuild roads in the United States, not for education and schools and the elderly and mental health. No, $25 billion to the Zionists to commit genocide. Think about that for a second. Nuh says, my Lord, do not leave a single disbeliever on earth. This term dayyara, it means the persistence of structures that undergird and support kufr and tyranny and oppression. And he says, إِنَّكَ إِن تَذَرْهُمْ يُضِلُّ عِبَادَكَ وَلَا يَلِدُ إِلَّا فَاجِرًا كَفَّارًا. For if you spare any of them, they will certainly mislead your servants and give birth only to wicked sinners, staunch disbelievers. Dear brothers and dear sisters, look at the exposure of the Epstein files. Look at an entire network of people. all complicit in the exploitation of the innocent, of young girls, of children. All of them complicit in interconnected systems of injustice, of exploitation, where for them the only motivation was what? The acquisition of wealth and power and influence, always at the expense of the vulnerable. We need to really think about how kufr is supporting each other, kufr supporting itself. And Allah Ta'ala again says, because Allah Ta'ala understands that the nature of the normalization of kufr is what? It is the sort of corruption of society en masse. For if you spare any of them, they will certainly mislead your servants and give birth only to wicked sinners, staunch disbelievers. And then finally, this du'a here. But Nuh recognizes that in the midst of all this, there is a group who is resisting. In the midst of all this, you will always have a group that will resist tyranny. They resist oppression. They will resist colonialism, apartheid, hegemony. And that resistance takes many forms. And even though we're focused on the Muslim Ummah, right? Even though we're focused obviously on the Quranic theology, I need to mention, dear brothers and dear sisters, look at the resistance of people in Minneapolis. People who are going out there to support and defend their neighbors, to deliver food, to make sure kids can go to school safely. We need to be very cognizant of the reality that even in the midst of a military takeover of a major U.S. city, that there were people that said, we're not going to accept this. And so going back to Sayyidina Nuh, that in his time, you had people who said, we're not going to accept this, the normalization of this type of corruption. And so these were the people who stayed with Sayyidina Nuh, alayhi salam. And that was at the cost of losing perhaps social status and respect and proximity to privilege, right? Because that's all the Epstein files were about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the dua of Nuh when he says, in recognition of those that said, we're going to resist this, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيَّ وَلِمَنْ دَخَلَ بَيْتِيَ مُؤْمِنًا وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَلَا تَزِدِ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا تَبَارًا. My Lord, forgive me, my parents, and whoever enters my house in faith, meaning they support the message and mission of Nuh and all believing men and women, and increase the wrongdoers only in destruction. In other words, Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, like the prophets and messengers, prophets before him and the prophets and messengers after him, understood that there is no normalizing and compromising with kufr and oppression and tyranny. You have to call it out for what it is. And you have to be willing to say that we will work, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, as long and as hard as we need to work, so that there will always be that group that resists tyranny and oppression. Right? That is the group, ultimately, that Allah Ta'ala refers to as His group, His party, Hizbullah in the Qur'an. And they are the group resisting Hizb al-Shaytan. Again, my dear brothers and dear sisters, this is not symbolism, this is not metaphor, this is actual reality. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to see truth as truth and always follow it, and to see falsehood as falsehood and to always shun it and to call it out. And don't forget our dhikr, inshallah, after this. Jazakumullah khairah. I pray this was beneficial. Anything beneficial is from Allah Ta'ala. Mistakes and shortcomings were entirely my own. And thank you. And may Allah Ta'ala bless you and your families with an accepted Ramadan and a beautiful and safe Eid. Wa jazakumullah khairah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.